1990 was the most dangerous year on record in Boston's history. The entire city was on edge. From Irish Southie and Charlestown to the Italian North End and Eastie, even Chinatown was stacking up bodies. But nowhere else in Boston was it more out of control than the black and brown neighborhoods. While the struggle in the black communities has been documented to a certain extent, very little has ever been discussed about the Latinos of this period. One crew seems to have captured the attention and imagination of many Bostonians who remember the era. Maybe it was because of their prolific graffiti murals, maybe it was because of their name, but either way they became the stuff of legend. Let's discuss the mysterious X-Men of Egleston Square and the events of November 26, 1990, a perfect snapshot into this chaotic and lawless period in Boston's history. What's up, everyone? Welcome back. I hope everyone had a very Merry Christmas, or at the very least survived it. So for this week's video, let's take a dive back into time to when Boston was one of the most dangerous cities in America. From 1988 to 1990, Boston's violent crime rate went from a relatively dangerous large American city to a place where violent crime scenes were popping up every few hours, bringing the police and residents to a breaking point. This was part of a larger problem that was affecting almost every big city in the country at the time, especially minority neighborhoods. But Boston as a whole was out of control. Italian organized crime was in open conflict as the patriarchal family tore itself apart. Dangerous Chinese street crews fought over the neighborhood's extremely lucrative rackets. Whitey was in Southie trying to sew the city up, and the Charlestown crews were sticking up everything that wasn't nailed down. To put it simply, Boston was a city on fire. I've made quite a few videos about the time period, and several depicting how bad it was in the black neighborhoods. Unforgettable stories like Darlene Tiffany Moore, and the travesty of the Charles Stewart case. But today we're going to discuss a group and a struggle not commonly brought up in the Boston discussion: Latinos and the infamous X-Men crew of Egleston Square. Latinos now make up over 20% of Boston's population, and these are official numbers from a census. The actual number is more likely higher. Many new Latino groups like Dominicans, Colombians, Mexicans, and Central Americans have moved into historically Italian neighborhoods in East Boston and black neighborhoods in Roxbury, Dorchester, and Mattapan. But in the 1980s, Latinos were a small group in Boston, with little pockets usually stuffed in between traditionally black areas. The majority of the original Latinos in Boston were Puerto Rican. Many of the original Puerto Ricans that came to Massachusetts came through the Connecticut River Valley as migrant farmers working on the many farms in western Mass and Connecticut in the 1940s. After the harvest, many stayed to live in Massachusetts permanently. The first major Puerto Rican community was in Holyoke, right on the Connecticut River. Many of the migrant farmers found year-round work in the city's paper mills. Holyoke still strongly identifies with its Puerto Rican heritage. A lot of the Boricuas moved further eastward into the Bay State, looking for a better life. Many settled in Worcester, the Merrimack Valley, and cities like Lawrence, Lowell, and Haverhill, cities that had thriving factories and mills. And of course, many Puerto Ricans ended up in the Commonwealth's biggest city and capital of Boston. The original heart of Puerto Rican Boston was in the South End. And then in the 1960s, when urban renewal sought to tear down the tenement row houses they lived in, they fought like no one else did and secured their very own Via Victoria public housing, the city's first and only Puerto Rican projects. It's quite a remarkable story. I made a video about it. Not many people watched it just because it's about history. It's not really street stuff. But it's an amazing story of perseverance. Go check it out if you have a moment. But for this video, we're going to discuss another legendary hood in Boston, which is basically the city's second largest early Latino hood after the South End, Jamaica Plain's Egleston Square. Egleston Square is one of the most legendary areas in Boston, especially in the late 80s and early 90s. It was a beehive of street activity. There were so many active crews in such a small area. The Egleston Timberwolves, Bragdon Street, the Walnut Park Dogs, Academy Homes and Heath Street, two of the city's biggest projects, were also in close proximity. Washington Street, which is one of Boston's main hood thoroughfares, goes right through the neighborhood. But probably the most memorable thing about Egleston Square in the late 80s was the graffiti when the Orange Line pulled up on the old elevated rail train referred to as the L. The Orange Line ran right through Roxbury on its way to JP, and was where the majority of the people in the neighborhood commuted on a daily basis. There was no smartphones to stare at, no brain rot, so everyone looked out the windows and saw the amazing graffiti murals, which were awe-inspiring, especially to the youth. Even after the L was taken down, the graffiti in Egleston Square area especially flourished, and one of the crews responsible for the most well-known murals were the notorious X-Men. Murals, however I said it. I'm not going to redo a whole voiceover because I said one word wrong. I always mess up words, like get over it. And excuse my voice too. I can't wait. I lost my voice like right after Christmas. I can't wait like weeks to do this. I saw, I had like no voice 3 days ago. Anyhow, The X-Men have always had an air of mystery about them, and they certainly were an enigma for the times. While most hoods in Boston rejected nationwide trends like LA's blue and red and Chicago's GDs and VLs, they adopted the monikers of different sports teams. The Humboldt Raiders, the Orchard Park Trailblazers, the Franklin Hill Giants, the Highland Blackhawks, etc. all repped hoods with sports teams' hats and apparel. Wearing the wrong team's hat or gear and the wrong hood could mean your life. But a Latino group from Egleston Square, which again was a small minority in the 1980s, most of these hoods in Boston were dominated by black crews. This group did not rep with a sports team, but instead they identified with the very popular comic book group, the X-Men. The X-Men were one of my favorite comics as a child, along with many other 80s kids, and in the new millennium there have been many popular movies made out of Stan Lee's creation of this superhero mutant group. I think this superhero comic book name helped give the X-Men a bit of a mythical aura. The other thing was, unlike most of the hoods in Boston that have endured for generations, continuing on old beefs and creating new ones, the X-Men exploded onto the scene in the late 80s and then disappeared just as quick. By the mid-1990s, they were basically extinct. A Dominican crew that went by the name Boylston Street basically took their place, but that's kind of a generality. It's not really the whole story. Let's try to understand why the X-Men had such a big impact in such a small period of time. There really isn't much info on the internet about the X-Men. What you find is mostly about the graffiti and pictures of the murals. Like most street stuff from Boston in the late 1980s and early 90s, there's very little digital footprint. To find out the info, you need to speak to people that lived through it. As the city and the wider Commonwealth change and gentrify at lightning speed, I think it's very important to make a lasting historical account of things that have happened before they're lost forever. Now, I know not everybody agrees with me about this, but I don't care. I'm going to keep doing this. It's very important to me. From what I can gather, the X-Men more or less started out just as a group of guys who hung out by Washington Street between School Street and Boylston in the Egleston Square neighborhood. They chilled, drank, puffed, some did graffiti, some were breakdancers. They were not an organized street crew. They actually had a spot they called the X-Men House. It became kind of like a rooming house for guys in their teens and 20s. Some were related, some were friends, some were co-workers, but this became the home base for the X-Men. To understand the origins of the crew, you need to understand how important the early hip-hop culture in Boston was in the 1980s. Every hood had a breakdancing crew, a graffiti crew, along with MCs. Before the violence got out of control, many neighborhoods would have breakdancing battles, which was a thing of pride, along with the talent of your hood's taggers, aka graffiti artists. Also, Boston's deep connection with the brand Adidas is a thing of legend. There are only a few select stores where you could purchase them in the 1980s in Boston, like Alpha Omega, Harry the Greeks, and Mickey Finn's. There was a legendary picture house at Lafayette Place. Before social media, this is how different crews used to brag and boast beyond graffiti, music, and breakdancing. Any crew that wanted to be known had a picture hung at Lafayette Place. This early hip-hop culture in Boston was similar to other cities on the East Coast, but it was also very unique, and I wish there was more about it documented. I've had people offer to help me with a video about the city and Massachusetts as a whole, graffiti's history, and bring me to some legendary murals. Let me know if that's something you guys are interested in. For the sake of this video, though, we're just going to discuss the history of Boston's graffiti in reference to the X-Men. Although there's a small dispute, most people will agree that the first person that began tagging X-Men in Boston was a cat called MK. MK had drifted north to Boston from Bridgeport, Connecticut. Many new Latino transplants in Boston were coming from New York City, cities in North Jersey, Connecticut cities like Bridgeport, New Haven, and Hartford. Apparently, MK didn't create the X-Men tag. It was already being used primarily in New York and boroughs like Brooklyn and the Bronx, but also in Connecticut cities like Bridgeport. MK claimed to know these dudes and continued on with tagging X-Men upon arriving to Boston. How true all this is, I can't verify 100%, being that I was 8 years old when the X-Men were around and I grew up on the North Shore. But either way, newcomers like MK mixed with Boston Latinos, forming new crews like the X-Men.
What's up, everybody? Good to be seen. Hope everybody's doing well. Hope everybody had a Merry Christmas. I thought I'd have this to you before the new year, but my kids are on school break for Christmas vacation. I get 2 whole weeks off. I don't remember ever getting 2 whole weeks off, but yeah, so I've been with them, and I had to do all my catch reports. I didn't do any of them. I was supposed to do one every month for clamming, and I didn't do them all this year, so I had to do all 12 months yesterday to renew it, or else my permit's not good after tomorrow. But thanks, guys. I'm glad everyone's happy that I'm back. The last video was doing awesome. I didn't think it was going to get back in the algorithm that quick within 2 videos. I hope people are going to like this video. This is something that people have been asking for a long time. Now, please, already people are jumping all over me because I posted something on Facebook about it. Obviously, I'm not going to have every single thing correct in this video. I don't claim to know everything or be 100% perfect. There's some pictures I'm going to put up that aren't exactly like just pictures from Boston in the time period. People are like, that's not a picture of X-Men. I'm like, I didn't say it was a picture of an X-Men. It's just, I'm not just talking about the X-Men in this video. I'm also talking about Boston as a whole during the time period, how crazy it was. So just please ease up, because you can get mad and pressure me and stuff like that, as people do, but when I took this little hiatus, what I realized is that a lot of people really enjoy this channel and this content, and they kind of like rely on it. Like some people, they just like their lives, and I can relate, because like sometimes life isn't perfect and you need to just kind of like dumb out and check out, and you have like these little comfort shows that you have. I have my own, so some people, this is that for them, and I really realized that, and it was so many people kept reaching out to me almost on like a daily basis. It was overwhelming, like to me, like how many people were like, bro, please. Like, it was just like genuine. I mean, some people were jerks, you know what I mean? Some people were roasting me, but most of it was just genuine, like, bro, we miss you, we want you back. So the bottom line is what I'm getting at is more people want these videos than don't. So I'm sorry if you're not happy about them or the content or what I say in these videos, but I'm going to keep making them, and I'm going to do my best to get the facts right and be respectful and be responsible like I always have, but it's just not going to stop, guys. So that's it. Thank you. God bless. Have a happy new year, 2026. We're going to rock.
One guy that I have spoken to who was around in the early days and actually lived at the X-Men house told me a few things that helped to fill in the blanks, but still there's an air of mystery around this story. Like many people who help me with stories who'd like to remain anonymous, which I always respect, but anytime you can make it to Gloucester, bro, I owe you some clams. I hope you're not angry about anything I'm saying in this video. I never mean any malintent with my videos. Never, ever. My source grew up as a young boy in the late 1960s in Boston's original Puerto Rican hub of the South End, but he moved to Egleston Square neighborhood a few years later. Egleston is basically right on the border of Roxbury and Jamaica Plain. It's why it's such a hotbed for street activity. He said he could remember as a small boy sitting on his stoop, looking in one direction and seeing a huge crew of adolescents coming from one end of the street, and looking at the other direction and seeing an equally large group coming towards them. In the 1950s, 60s, and early 70s, crews would have massive brawls in the streets and parks of Boston, and it happened in other cities too, like Lynn, Chelsea, I'm sure out in Worcester and Springfield. Pretty much every big city in Massachusetts used to be like that. This was before things completely broke down in the 1980s, and people lost their lives at the drop of a hat. But for Boston-born X-Men, this was the reality of their early lives. They were the minority of the minority, and many grew up fighting for everything. Many of the new Latino arrivals in Boston came from larger Latino communities and brought a new style with them. Like I said previously, the X-Men didn't start out as a criminal street organization. They were just a group that hung out together, and many lived at the quote-unquote X-Men house. Some were breakdancers, and most notably, some were graffiti artists. There wasn't any real dramatic event that happened to shift the X-Men into the realm of what the police would call the G word. It was more of just the environment and the times in Boston. By the late 1980s, every hood had clicked up, and many involved in the selling of a lucrative new product that was turning American cities upside down. It was like if you didn't form a crew, some other hood would just come in and pack you guys up. My friend says basically one day, because many people were already referring to themselves as X-Men because of the prolific graffiti murals, someone began chanting, "F that! We X-Men!" And the whole group began chanting, "F that! We X-Men! We X-Men!" And so the graffiti / breakdancing group officially became a street crew calling themselves the X-Men. I guess that's what I'm told. Even though they might have not originally had the intention of becoming a feared street crew, it didn't take long for this to become the fact of the matter. The X-Men's fearless attitude became a thing of legend, and it wasn't only in regards to other street crews, but also the Boston Police Department. In previous videos, I've discussed the incredibly intricate and complicated layers of Boston's alliances and rivalries during this time period. It was imperative, especially if you're a smaller hood, to make smart alliances in order to not get steamrolled by larger hoods. And with Boston's tightly packed neighborhoods, there was rivals at every corner. The Latino hoods were really no different than the black neighborhoods during this time period, forming alliances and creating bitter rivalries. The X-Men's main rival was nearby Mozart Park, which, as a side note, had one of Boston's worst Latino rivalries in history with Boylston Street in the 2000s. That was the New Age Dominican group that formed after the X-Men disintegrated. My friend tells me that while Boylston Street is mostly Dominican, many of the original X-Men were Puerto Rican, although they did have some Dominican members as well. One of the city's biggest and oldest Latino hoods, Via Victoria, was cool with the X-Men but had a bitter rivalry with Mission Hill, especially the Spanish side of MHP that sometimes referred to themselves as the Goyas. The Archdale Projects, which was like 60-40 Latino at the time, had a beef with the Beachland Projects. Now, it wasn't as clear and cut as all this, but for argument's sake, let's just say that the Latino crews were like this: Via Victoria, Archdale, and the X-Men on one side, and Mozart, Mission Hill, and Beachland on the other side. Now, I'm saying it's not as clear and cut as that. It was a messy time in the 1980s. And also, just another little side note, there was a Latino crew from Jamaica playing on Green Street that eventually became LKs. A few Latino crews did this. Now, these Latino crews didn't live inside a bubble and had wider alliances and rivalries throughout the city with non-Hispanic crews as well, but the fiercest beefs were with other Spanish crews. Now, as the Boston streets became increasingly more dangerous and violent throughout the late 80s, especially in 88 and 89, but 1990 was the most violent year in Boston's history. This was the city's record high of 152 bodies. That's basically one every other day. Try to put that in a frame of reference of what the city is like today when there's barely 2 per month. It's insane. It's hard to understand if you weren't there how dangerous and out of control the city was at that time. The city's residents and police had a horrible relationship, especially in the minority neighborhoods. Boston is historically considered one of the most racist northern cities in America, and its predominantly white police force did not have a good working relationship with the minority neighborhoods. In fact, it was terrible. And after the 1989 debacle of Charles Stewart, there was zero trust in the year of 1990 between the police and the minority youth of Boston. This led to the events of November 26, 1990, when a young man named Hector Morales had a run-in with the BPD that would go down in history. Now, whether or not Hector Morales was an official member of the X-Men is something that can be debated. I mean, were there any actual members, or was it just a loosely affiliated group of guys? I've heard, multiple things. They didn't have a constitution or initiation rights as far as I know. From what I gather, there was the original group of guys from the X-Men house, and then as the name began to ring bells on the Boston streets, more and more people began to claim X-Men. It's a pretty common story, right? Whether or not Hector Morales was an official member, the 19-year-old hung out with the X-Men and was certainly affiliated. Apparently around 9 p.m. on November 26, 1990, 2 plainclothes police officers in the Egleston Square area of Washington Street were conducting a routine patrol when they were ambushed by Morales, according to the BPD. But people who were there say the police had pulled over a young black man and were roughing him up. There are claims that the man was recognized as a member of the feared Castlegate street crew, but upon this incident, a crowd gathered. They began to yell at the police, and things escalated quickly. Now, this is where fact and legend cross. What happened to cause the outcome? Who fired first? Whose fault it really was? I can't say. I wasn't there. But the result was 2 police officers were hit and hospitalized, while 19-year-old Hector Morales lost his life. The BPD claimed that Morales ambushed the officers with a shotty, hitting them both in the cabeza. In retaliation, Morales was hit with overwhelming force. Witnesses say that even after he was neutralized, the officers kept emptying on him. He was transported to Boston City Hospital, where the 19-year-old was pronounced unalived. He was probably long gone, but to try to quell the escalation in Egleston Square, they called an ambulance pretending he was clinging on to life. Now, that's just my thought. It might not be true, but I think that's what probably happened. Of course, all his friends and people from the neighborhood who already didn't like the BPD reacted in anger seeing what had just transpired. Another officer who arrived on the scene chased youth down Washington Street and was cornered and beaten. He too would join his fellow officers in the ER. The BPD then sent in an overwhelming force to quiet down Egleston Square, but still residents and community leaders along with X-Men demanded answers. They called upon Mayor Ray Flynn and Police Commissioner Francis Roche to do something. Egleston residents claimed that the 19-year-old acted in self-defense and was only packing bird pellet. None of the officers sustained life-threatening injuries, and the response was typical of the heavy-handed modus operandi the BPD had become infamous for in the 1980s. Mayor Flynn said that there would be an investigation and results, but like most incidents of the period, it went nowhere and nothing happened. Well, I hope you guys enjoyed this video. Of course, not every aspect is going to be correct 100%, but like all my work, I do my best to find the facts and introduce them in a non-biased, hopefully entertaining fashion. Sometimes it works, sometimes it doesn't, This is just a story I've always been interested in doing. Like I said previously, the X-Men were an enigma of the time and disappeared so quickly. Very little was recorded about them, so naturally my curiosity got the best of me. I just think it's a very important snapshot from an incredibly dangerous and lawless time in Boston's past. This event really captures, for me anyways, the energy and reality of the Boston streets during the late 1980s and early 1990s. There was never a time before that which could be compared, and there certainly never will be a time in Boston's future that will be anywhere near as dangerous. The early 1990s were like a final cleansing of the gritty, old, dirty Boston streets of the 1900s, paving the way for the gentrification of the new millennium. Thank you to my X-Men friend and all my other compatriots who helped me with information along the way that cannot be researched on the internet. Like always, you guys are the backbone of this channel. I am forever grateful. Cheers, fellas. Have a happy new year.